Bueno, nuestra última charla del día es con Michael y Chloe. Los dos van a estar tocando el día de mañana. Los voy a dejar en las manos de ellos y esperemos a ver qué sucede de toda esta reunión. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chloe Lula. I'm a DJ, but I'm also a music journalist, and I'm very excited to be talking to Michael Wollenhaupt, also known as Ancient Methods. So his industrial techno project has developed a cult following since he started in 2005, and he's released at least 18 EPs, maybe more than that, on labels including Hospital, Sonic Groove, Aufnahmen Wiedergabe, and of course his own label, Persephonic Sirens. He also has a number of amazing collaborations, including Eschaton with Orphix and Ugandan Methods with Regis, so I'm very excited to talk a little bit about his career. And I wanted to do something a little bit different for this chat. And I asked Michael to pick a few songs that have been formative in his musical development and to just walk us through why they resonated so much with him. And my hope is that everyone here can leave with a greater understanding of the man behind the music. And I wanted to start off with your childhood. You grew up in rural Germany, is that right?
Yeah, in the suburbs of Berlin, but
Okay.
it started to get rural there already.
What was your family life like? Was music a part of your household growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to that I've witnessed the last years of East Germany, the GDR. As you probably all know, it was a separate country, and I grew up in the eastern part, and so growing up in this country was quite particular, now in retrospective, of course, and the family life, I think, was really good because I was young enough that the limitations that growing up in that country didn't really have an effect on me. So yeah, the family life was very liberal, which is not taken for granted in an environment that is very illiberal, and in a way I grew up in a very protected and free environment. So when I look back, and if I would have to pick like one aspect of the family life, I would say it's the freedom that my family gave me, which was like maybe most fundamental for me. So freedom is a lot related to trust, and also tolerance, like one of the main things that my parents taught me was like what freedom actually means: freedom to disagree, or the freedom to have a different opinions. Maybe the most important part of my early childhood family life.
Were you listening to music a lot as a family? Like I know that you trained classically at one point. You played the trombone.
Yeah.
So was classical music was that part of your home environment?
I mean, yes and no. My mother had like a little bit of education in this regard, but I mean, we were lucky enough that we had, like, from my grandparents, like a piano in the house, and this one thing I remember, I was obsessed with, like, this one Schumann piece that I forced my mother to play over and over again, and she was, but in general, music or classical music was like not a dominant part of the family life.
Well, so maybe we can listen to the first song that you chose.
All right.
If you want, hit it. So that is Magnetic Fields Part 2 by Jean-Michel Jarre, and you told me, so you're growing up in this liberal household, and this was your first exposure to electronic music, so can you paint a little bit of a picture?
Yeah, so that was basically like one of the first songs that I was like consciously listening to on the radio. I think it was my first encounter with pure electronic music, and I was like a very little child, and there was always music playing, mostly radio music, because like I said, in the GR there was not so much around. Like you couldn't just go to a shop and buy records or anything like that. But radio was the main source for music, and I remember it had something fascinating, but also something scary to me as a child. It's something gloomy and something unsettling, and maybe the reason for that was because it was like pure electronic, which was different from most of the music that was played back then in the radio. And maybe it also, I don't know, this is like wild speculation, but I like thinking about now, it was in this environment of the last period of the Cold War, so it kind of also had this sort of triggered some dystopian feeling in me, because it was so different. And it was definitely like my first encounter with electronic music.
Do you feel that you developed an appetite for electronic music after that, or was it not for a few years that you really...
No, not at this stage. I mean, I was maybe 6, 7 years or something like this when I heard it the first time.
So maybe we can go into the second song that you selected.
Okay, brace yourself.
Public Enemy, and I have to say that I was pretty surprised when you sent this one to me.
I guess someone in the room...
Not one I would have expected from you. So tell me a little bit about why this song holds significance.
So yeah, I picked the song because this was the first record I ever bought with my own money, and this is like one of these things in life that you remember, like you remember the first time you buy your first vinyl record, and it was Public Enemy at that time. And yeah, I had what probably some people don't know, I had a very short liaison with hip hop. Yeah,
I did not know that. Yeah, no, it almost seems a bit antithetical to what you're doing with the Ancient Methods project.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, getting into hip hop was actually not so much triggered by the music itself, but at that time I was very into skateboarding. So, and if you were like in this kind of bubble, it was either punk or hip hop that was like accepted in your bubble. And so I got more through the sport actually into that kind of music. It was like very fascinating, but also it stopped fascinating me after a short period, especially like with the rise of the so-called gangster hip hop, which like really ultimately turned me off from hip hop and that kind of disconnected me from that kind of music. But at that time, I was like really fascinated by it. And this record and this song, I think it might not have obvious links to what I do, but this is really like the art of sampling. The amount of samples and how they are compiled into one coherent song is just an incredible piece of art. And I mean, we just listened to the first, but actually, in particular, if you listen to that track, the last minute, which is like pure instrumental, and it's just running, it's very hypnotic. It actually has a lot of things like repetitive structures that also you find in other dance music. Like, I think actually a lot of parallels to techno, and then how they're using this Prince guitar sample, which is like ultimately brain piercing, like a wall of noise in the end. Is I think there are parallels, but they're maybe not so obvious.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. So around how old were you when you were listening to Public Enemy?
I was 12 years.
Okay. So at what point did you start getting interested in techno?
Like in Berlin, like when I was like maybe 13, 14, like early teenage. I got to know techno through the radio, and there was like a weekly radio show, always Saturday 8 in the evening, and I was like a maniac taping. I have still like tons of tapes in my basement from that time.
That's cool.
And yeah, this is how I got to know techno, because at that time there was no internet, nothing. It was the only source. So
eventually you moved to Berlin, and you were working at Hardwax. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were also going to school, studying law, since you practice law full time.
Yeah.
And you were simultaneously DJing at Tresor as well. And I actually was not aware that you used to be a resident there until I was doing preparation for this interview. So what was that period of music like in the city, and like where were you in your own musical development?
Hardwax was actually my job as a student, so this is how that financed my studies. And at that time, I was already for quite a long period into techno. I mean, it was minimum 6-7 years of listening to that music. So Hardwax was already kind of like a second stage, like a second phase, and already started struggling a little bit because there was a lot changing. On the one hand, like in the clubs, the music became harder, loopier, the so-called trance. I don't know if anyone in the audience knows what that is. If not, you're not missing out. So yeah, I became more and more like less and less interested in techno. At the same time, I was working in Hardwax, which was again a completely different environment, because at that time it was the peak of IDM, not EDM, like David Guetta and stuff, but IDM is I think it's an abbreviation for intelligent dance music, and so that was again another bubble where I couldn't really relate to. I mean, I enjoyed working there a lot. I couldn't think of a better job as a student, but it was a period of alienation a little bit, and but on the other hand, also a period of new orientation, seeking for new music that became interesting and important for me.
What were you mostly playing at Tresor at this time? Because when I think about Tresor back then, I think more of like minimal techno as being kind of the style.
I mean, at that time, like the time between, let's say, 98 and 2003, it was like still this period where techno became faster, loopier, harder. After like around 2002, 2003, where it was basically collapsing into the exact opposite, like from super hard into kind of aesthetic, convenient minimalism.
So simultaneously, there was a really strong punk movement happening in Berlin, and you chose as your third song something that you said was really an essential descriptive song of post-reunification era in East Germany. So maybe we can listen to that. So this was Deutschland halt's Mal. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, that's pretty close.
So it translates to Germany shut up. What about this song defined the zeitgeist of this time for you?
Yeah, so maybe first, just for the chronology, this song is from 1991, and okay. So this was actually like, I mean, there's a huge overlap of punk and techno until this day, but like at that time it was the dominant music I was listening to. And it's from 1991, 2 years after the reunification of Germany, and so basically it really reflects the zeitgeist, and in particular the feeling of that time, which was like, on the one hand it was anarchic, it was like the dissolution of structures, and at the same time the reunification triggered sort of a neo-nationalist movement, and unfortunately also a rise of extreme right-wing neo-fascist movement, which you could like literally feel every day on the street. Like, for example, like being someone riding a skateboard, you have to be attentive in the streets. Just a car would stop and guys would jump out and you had to run, otherwise they would beat you up, because riding a skateboard was apparently already like strange enough to be not accepted. So it was a very hostile, insecure, and dark environment actually. And like this song is exactly describing like this kind of vibe or feeling at that time in that country, which was turning like self-awareness and self-confidence into something very ugly.
Mm. Were you involved in the punk scene at all? Like, were you going out to punk shows a lot?
It depends. I mean, like at that time, still living in a suburb means like a small community. It's not really like a scene in terms of artist or activist. I mean, at that time, I was still, I considered myself as political, but there was not really like a scene or a movement. It was mostly like parties, Friday evening, getting drunk, and you would start listening to punk music, and the music also felt was something more on the side and not part of something political.
Mm. So, I mean, throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, it seems like you were like really putting the pieces together for what became your musical vocabulary as Ancient Methods. How did the project start? Because I know at one point it was two people. It was you and somebody named Conrad.
Yeah, at the beginning, the live shows were like two people, and I think it's around 2005 or 2007 or something, and where the first releases out. And I mean, it started very slow because at that time that kind of music was not really like in fashion at the techno scene, so it was very difficult. For example, like every distribution would like refuse me, like, so without the help of the former workmates at Hardwax, there would be no way that I could distribute the records, which at that time you still needed. Like the distributions were the gatekeeper because you didn't have the Bandcamp DIY business. So yeah, it started very slow, and it was like a very constant, slow way to where the project is now.
Mm. You've remained really committed to your sound from the beginning, and that's something I really admire about Ancient Methods. And even despite like the BPM arms race that's happening right now, like you're still playing at the same speed. Have you found it difficult not to be influenced by trends over the last 20 years of the project?
Everything comes down to passion, and this is the main source of inspiration. And I think a lot of these movements, especially like in the techno scene, they are like triggered by other things than music. It's,
what is one example?
You mean of these influences?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, if it's not obvious, but then I would say it's mostly money and fame. Instagram is something like instant gratification. That means you just have to present yourself in a certain way that seems like a promise for success, and then in 2 weeks, no matter if you have any skills or not, you will end up playing gigs for a lot of money. And maybe that is also working for a very small minority, but if you think that is a recipe for what you want to do, then you're maybe much more prone to be influenced by trends than if you come from a completely different angle, which is the content and which is like the music and the passion, because that doesn't change so easily. It's not something like that doesn't change within 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your music because there's so much nuance in everything that you write. I mean, just from like a production level, but also just from like a narrative point of view. And I was reading an interview that you did with K magazine, and you said that there are often several conceptual layers you try to house in your work, sometimes with hidden links. Can you talk a little bit about that?
This is maybe something very personal, because I think this is maybe so hidden that most of the people don't really notice it, you know. But it doesn't matter, because you, in the end, you do it for yourself in the first place. And maybe the most obvious example, I don't know if it's obvious, but for me it is like the Seventh Seal record that I did, which has like different layers. I'm pretty sure there are people in the audience that maybe have a very different, when you just say the name Seventh Seal, some connected with the movie, some connected maybe with a song, some connected with occultism. So there are lots of different things that you can hint to, and I like to put these links there, and that's also the beauty of it. But for example, especially with this record, I had once somebody who was writing me, and he literally recognized everything. He saw everything, and so it's like, wow, I have to send the guy something. Like, you feel like very connected, even you don't even have a face to the person you're talking to.
Well, speaking of Siren, I mean, so your label name is Persephonic Sirens, and I was looking up the exact meaning of Persephonic, and there are many different meanings. So why did you choose this as the name of your label?
Yeah, I think there are always links into mythology, and especially Greek mythology, like throughout the years. I like the idea, like with the previous label, Ancient Messages, I like always the idea to have something graphic connected with the name. And while the graphic actually referred to a short Nietzsche poem, I like the idea of the Persephonic, which means like that light and dark meet each other at a certain point, and at this meeting point, something irrational and something very beautiful, something very blissful is happening. So I like that, just this picture that it like triggered in my head, and the illustration that I did with the logo. I just find it a beautiful thing.
I didn't realize that you were such an avid reader, because when I was preparing for the interview, you did, there are other interviews you've done where you've referenced Nietzsche, Hermann Hesse, and I guess that's a real, provides a lot of inspiration for your music as well. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. I mean, so while we're kind of on a more personal note, maybe we can play, is this the last song, or did you choose another one after that?
There's one more song, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was This Mortal Coil, Song to the Sirens. And you said that this is a very personal song, but I actually don't know the story behind it. So maybe you can share a little bit about why you chose it.
Yeah, I mean, it's personal in, I would say, two different regards. Like, on the one hand, this song, which is like a cover version, was like something that I would like constantly encounter. In particular, like, it was frequently played by Dead Can Dance or Brendan Perry at their shows, and of course I also love the band This Mortal Coil. So on the one hand, it's like it's a very musical like part of me. On the other hand, I mean, it's I cannot go too much into details, but it is obviously like a very sad love song. And when you listen to love songs, it's besides being cheesy, they're like always somehow like abstract, or at least for me, they were like somehow abstract. Sometimes I couldn't really relate what the people singing about, even especially when it was like in a very poetic language, which is again like sort of abstract or coded. And with this song, it was really like at an encounter with a siren, I was like, wow, yeah, this is actually not abstract at all. It's like very literal in a way. And yeah, sometimes I feel that you have to go to certain situations in life to fully comprehend the depth of some lyrics or some music.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to talk a little bit about also just your DJing and like your creative process. So you're working full time as a lawyer. When do you find time to work on music?
Hardly ever. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a problem. I cannot recommend it. I'm not lying about it. It's very difficult. And I feel I'm like constantly on the edge of a burnout. It's definitely better if you somehow manage to just focus on the music, because it requires your full attention, and it requires also a lot of spare time. Not so much in terms of, you know, being lazy, hanging around or whatever, but like in terms of spare time for inspiration, because I felt like I had a short moment during my past as a musician where I had this amount of spare time just for getting inspired, and it was like really like I felt, for me it was like the peak of inspiration. Reading, watching movies was like basically part of my training compared to a sportsman, maybe like nutrition and recovery is part of, it's not just training, and it's similar. I find it's similar as a musician. It's not just sitting in the studio and practicing your instrument or writing music, but also this external input. You just need this, and of course, this is very difficult to handle when you have a job. On the other hand, I don't really regret it, because what I certainly feel, you were just talking about, oh, you never changed, or you never, like, you didn't really change the music no matter how much the environment changed. And I feel this is, on the other hand, one of the benefits of being like financially independent. I felt like I never had to compromise. And it was already at the time when I started the project, I was like, back then already old enough that I saw the first cycle of people in the techno scene which been playing music that I loved before, how they changed. And that was not always, I felt, it was not always on their own free will, because all of a sudden they liked the music that sounded completely like the opposite of what they were doing before. I felt like maybe a financial need. So in this regard, I felt like it also gives me a lot of freedom. Like I'm independent. If the music's not working tomorrow anymore and I can't pay the bills, I don't have to worry, and I don't need to compromise, which probably, when I think about it, would be the most heartbreaking thing. Yeah. Because I feel like I have so much passion and love for the music that this would be possibly my worst nightmare, maybe even worse than stopping the music.
You also seem like someone who needs the intellectual stimulation of, or who enjoys the intellectual stimulation of your job, which seems very demanding.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's maybe like similar to getting inspired. I mean, it's something completely different, but it's also like as you said, like it's intellectually stimulating, and I like the change, and I also like the challenge sometimes.
So earlier we listened to a hip-hop track, which you said is a really good example of sampling. Do you use a lot of sampling in your own work? You do have so much texture and nuance in your production, so what is your process like?
Yeah, I mean, sampling, yes, it does play, it certainly does play a role, but maybe not so much anymore. I mean, everyone who followed the project long enough, like with the first records, there were some very obvious, if not blatant, links.
Well, I know the famous Room 506 track.
Oh no, I was not even talking about that.
Oh, okay.
I forgot about this. This was just plain robbery, but
Okay.
I used samples that, of course, like nowadays I probably wouldn't use again. Also, I mean, we just heard that Public Enemy track, which I believe has minimum 15 to 20 samples. If you would do that nowadays, you would be like bankrupt in 5 seconds because they would sue the hell out of you. Because also with the internet, everything became first more visible, and secondly, also much more difficult. Like, I don't know how much I reveal here is secret. I mean, I'm like kind of working as a day job in that field myself, so yeah. Maybe I'm more sensitive to that. But in general, I feel it's also limiting a lot. And if you would try to do this nowadays, you would need to hire an army of lawyers for the right clearance, and you probably would have to pay a fortune for it. So it makes it simply impossible for most people, at least, to release music like that. And I think it's a shame, because I think that, especially techno, I always saw techno as something like a vehicle to transport things. You make that dancey, and with that, you make it accessible to a lot of people that otherwise probably wouldn't encounter certain kinds of music. But due to the legal limits, of course, it's much more difficult to use that function properly. And by sampling, you can't rule out that after hearing this Public Enemy track, someone is buying the George Clinton record or buying the Prince record or one of the other 20 records that got sampled there. And I always think we are looking at that just as a theft and not so much as an enrichment. But of course, there is no general formula for this. I would actually like to feel more free about sampling and use it a lot more than I do.
How do you approach the balance between experimentation and the needs of the dance floor?
It's similar to what I just said. Like, for me, techno is probably like, it makes a lot of things very accessible, and it gives a very versatile frame to put content and transport it. So when I think about my own music, I always have this feeling, okay, I have to kind of put this in this dancey, accessible environment. And when I do that, I have the chance to put a lot of things into it and give it to people that otherwise would be turned off. But with this formula that makes the content, the experimentation, or whatever it is, accessible, the people might be all of a sudden open to it and might also like take it from there and go further. Talking about samples, let's say you sample a folk song that no one never had before. You make it dancey and the people like it. And maybe we start looking, oh, what's the story behind? Who did that? Where is this coming from? Which region in the world? What is the story about the artist? They maybe start digging, and with that, you kind of build a link with a very simple formula. And same applies for experimentation. That if you can make a wild record that many people find not accessible because they just don't see a pattern, or for other reasons don't have an access to it. But the picture might change completely the moment you add this simple formula.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, this is also assuming that your audience is listening really critically, which I don't know how many people are these days. But did you have one more song, or? Well, I guess. Oh no, there is one more. Okay, I actually don't. I didn't know that we were going to play another song. So what is this song?
Well, I tried to make a link here. We didn't hear it long enough, but it was basically an edit I did for like sort of a dark wave band. I think they're from South America, Peru. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they are. So this is like a song that people should hear. So what I just did, what I do like quite often, I just made it a bit more accessible. You know, like some people might find that not all right, but this is what I mean. Like, I make it accessible. I play it in my set. Some people like it. They start asking, "Oh, what is that?" And I say, "Oh, it's actually like this band from Peru," and they maybe start buying it and start following it, and
yeah, like
so,
recontextualizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have coming up next for the Ancient Methods project? Like, do you have any plans to evolve it, or any plans just, I mean, for releases?
Yeah, I mean, the label is still very busy. Like, unfortunately, I don't have so much time at the moment to dedicate to my own productions. I always have hundreds of ideas and projects to do, but yeah, I hope that's the New Year's resolution, to find a bit more time next year to get a bit more active on the production side again.
You've navigated a very long and prolific career despite not having much time to produce. I mean, you have a ton of music out. What is the greatest lesson you've learned on maybe a personal level or a professional level?
The greatest lesson? Did I ever learn a lesson at all? I mean, there's not this one great lesson. I think that's just a lot of small lessons that you learn on the way. And but there's not like this one thing that I can point to and say, oh yeah, hallelujah, that was it. It came to me, and that's something that struck me and was like a revelation to me. No, not really. I couldn't really name anything. Like, everything nowadays is so disconnected from content. It's everything but content. It's mostly pictures, videos, whatever. So I think for the people nowadays, it's so much harder to cut through with just music. And I can't really say it was a lesson, but I think I was very lucky in this regard, that I could start at a point where the environment was like so very different from how it is now.
Mm. Well, we're lucky to be a part of a festival that supports the kind of music that we both enjoy.
Exactly.
I think that we have a few minutes for questions from the audience.
Thanks, great conversation. Here at the festival the next 3 days, which artists are you most excited to hear?
Yeah, I don't even know where to start, because it's such a fantastic lineup that I basically could like put my tent in the middle of the corridor and just like stay and try to catch them all. So yeah, I mean, maybe there's actually like 3 artists from my label that I would love to hear, but unfortunately I'm leaving already on Saturday. So if you have the chance, then maybe also beside the amazing festival, enjoy the after party on Sunday, where Second Tension from Thessaloniki, Horde from Bordeaux, like a dark wave act, and my friend Ruben is playing, and that's going to be on Sunday, the after party. But this is just like, it's more advertising now for the label than it's the other artists I would equally like to hear.
Okay. Anybody else?
What area of law do you specialize in?
I do litigation and intellectual property law.
Straight to the point. I think that's probably it. I'll let you finish up, and thank you so much.
So yeah,
again.
thank you for,
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.